Hello Year 10, it's Mr. Godman here and I'm looking forward to teaching you today for your final history lesson of the half term. And today we are going to be looking a little more at how to write a narrative which analyses and explains. As usual, you need to get yourself ready for the lesson. So you're going to need your workbook, a pen, perhaps some scrap paper, and I'd like you to put away any distractions like mobile phones. Pause now, and when you're ready, hit play. So it's time for your do now next, and that's activity 9.1 in your workbook. Last lesson, we weren't really covering any new content. So today's do now has 5 questions about all of the stuff we've done over the last few lessons. So it's quite a difficult do now today. As usual, can you make sure please that you don't look back at your knowledge organisers or your notes? I want you to do this from memory because we are trying here to improve your recall. Pause now, have a go at the questions, and when you're ready to move forward, hit play. And these are the correct answers. As always, I'd like you to mark your own work. Remember, if you get one wrong, you need to correct it, preferably in a different colour pen. And don't forget, give yourself a mark out of 5 at the end. So today's lesson is really part 2 of something we began last time when we were looking at how to write a narrative which analyses and explains. We're going to do a little more revision today on how the Cold War developed between 1947 and 1949. We'll look again at how to write a narrative. And then at the end of the lesson, you're going to have a little practice of writing a narrative of your own. So usually I would get you to update your knowledge organiser now, but I'm not going to ask you to do that. Instead, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and spend a few moments reading through your knowledge organiser, particularly all the stuff which we have covered over the last few lessons, because you're going to need that knowledge in today's lesson. So spend a little time studying your knowledge organiser, and when you're ready to move forward, hit play. So we've come to the end of our topic on the development of the Cold War, and last lesson we practiced writing a narrative all about the First Berlin Crisis. We'll write another narrative today, but the one we do today is going to be a little bit different. It's not just going to be about one of these events, it's going to be about the period as a whole. So you might need to talk about more than one of these events in your answer. And here's your starter task, activity 9.2 in your workbook. I've given you 3 tables. Each table focuses on one particular event which we've looked at in the period 1947 to 1949. You also have, for each event, 4 statements, A, B, C and D. And I'd like you to read each statement, and then I want you to tick for each one. Is it a cause of the event, or is it a consequence of the event? Now remember, causes are reasons why something happens, and consequences are the results of something. You will need to pause now when you do this, and you are more than welcome to go back to the work that we did over the last few lessons if you need to. When you're ready, hit play and we'll move forward. Okay, so let's check our answers, and you need to make sure that you correct anything which you got wrong. Event 1 was the Truman Doctrine. And first up, we have a reason why Truman issued the Truman Doctrine. Then we have another reason why Truman issued the doctrine. He was influenced by the long telegram. The next one is a result of the Truman Doctrine. And the last one is a result as well. Communist rebels in Greece were defeated. The second event you looked at was the Soviet Union creating Cominform. That first statement is a reason why the Soviet Union set Cominform up. It was reacting to the Marshall Plan. The next one is a consequence. Communist parties in the satellite states were told what to do by Cominform. The next one is also a consequence. Communists in France and Italy were instructed by Cominform to disrupt the Marshall Plan. And that last one is a reason why Stalin set up Cominform. And here's our last event, the creation of NATO. That first statement is a result of the creation of NATO. The Soviet Union set up a military alliance of its own. The next one is a reason why NATO was set up. Stalin tried to force the Western Allies out of Berlin. The next one is a consequence of setting up NATO. And last but not least, our final statement is a reason why NATO was created. How did you do on this? Did you get them all right? So we're not going to introduce any new content today, but we are going to look again at how to write a narrative which analyses. And we're going to practice today with this example question, which is write a narrative account which analyses the deterioration of superpower relations in the years 1947 to 1949. So you have to write a narrative account explaining how and why superpower relations got worse in this period. So we have a focus. We have to focus throughout our answer on when, how, and why relations got worse. And it's really important that we keep coming back to that as we write our answers. We've been given a time frame to focus on, 1947 to 1949, and we need to stick within that. We've also been given a starting point and an end point for our narrative. So we're going to start with the Truman Doctrine, and the final event in our narrative is going to be the creation of NATO. So what do we need to do in our answers? Well, we're going to write 3 paragraphs in total, and you don't need an introduction or a conclusion here. We're going to need to write about 3 events in chronological order. Now, the first event is going to be the Truman Doctrine. The last event is going to be the creation of NATO. The middle event in our story is down to you. So you can choose an event of your own to go in the middle there. We need to include some specific knowledge and details in every paragraph. And we need to make sure that we're analysing. We're not just going to tell the story. we need to explain how and why events happen. So we're going to need to build in explaining phrases in our work. And remember, the final sentence of each paragraph should be a link to the next event in our narrative. And we'll see a model of that in a moment. So what would a really good paragraph on this look like? Well, here's a model paragraph for you to take a look at. I'm going to ask you to pause the video again now, and I want you to read this model paragraph for yourself. When you've read it, I want you to write down what has this student done which makes this a really good paragraph. What went well for this student? What are the strengths of her work? And when you've done that, you can hit play and we'll feed back a little bit. Okay, so let's think about why this is a good part of an answer. The first thing this student does is she introduces a key event in her first sentence. That's her big point. She then supports that with some really good specific knowledge. She has some dates, she has some key events, she has some key people. It's clear that she knows and understands what was in the Truman Doctrine. She also uses explaining phrases. Now, in particular, we're going to pick out a few here that are really, really good ones. Here's one. He did this because. So she's explaining why Truman took that action. Here's another one. Which meant. So she's explaining what something means. Here's another one. Consequently. So all the way through this, our student has tried to explain why things happen and why they made superpower relations worse. At the end of the paragraph, our student writes a link which connects this event to the next event in her narrative, which is going to be the creation of common form. And so you're ready now for your main activity, which is activity 9.3 in your workbook. I want you to have a go now at writing up this narrative. Remember, you have a copy already in your workbook of our success criteria. And when you're writing, I'd like you to keep those to hand and try to follow them. And if you need to, you could rewind the video slightly and go back and look again at our model paragraph if you need to. That would be a really good thing to do if you get stuck. Well done in today's lesson. And well done over the course of the last few weeks, Year 10, as we've been working on this unit. If you want to take today's lesson a little further, then you could have another go at writing a narrative account for this question. You will need to revisit the work that we did on the wartime conferences, and you can watch our YouTube video about that. I'll put up the link for you in a moment. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. If you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, then please do so by clicking the link here so that you know when new videos are published. And here's that video on the wartime conferences, which I promised you a moment ago.